she stood up for a stranger, never knowing he was the one person who could change her entire life. What would you do if your very first act of honesty at a new job put you at odds with someone powerful, someone you hadn't even met? Evelyn Maynard, 32, had just started as an executive assistant to a CEO she'd never seen. His name echoed through the halls like myth, cold, brilliant, untouchable. Until one morning at a quiet bakery. She defended a young waitress from a harsh customer only to discover days later that he was her boss. But instead of punishment came an invitation. Instead of silence, a spark. This is not a story about career success. It's a story about courage, about the quiet kind of love that brews slowly like coffee at 9:03, about being seen, not for what you say, but for what you stand for when no one's watching. If you've ever believed that kindness leaves a mark, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Shining Stories, where every tale touches a deeper truth. Now, let's begin. She had been there 5 days. 5 full days of arriving early, leaving late, dressing sharp, thinking sharper and still. She hadn't once heard the voice of the man she worked for. Not a single word, not a single meeting, not even a distant hallway hello. Evelyn Maynard had accepted the role of executive assistant to Jonathan Pierce with equal parts curiosity and caution. The offer had come quickly after her interview, so quickly, in fact, that she'd reread the job description twice just to make sure she hadn't missed a hidden clause. But there it was, clear as daylight, executive assistant to the CEO. Westbridge Capital. The salary was generous, the benefits impeccable, and the title a step higher than anything she'd held before. So she said yes. She didn't expect a warm welcome, but she didn't expect this. Quiet, either. The 27th floor of the Westbridge Tower was as beautiful as it was sterile. White walls, black marble floors, glass that sparkled like frost. People moved with purpose, spoke in carefully measured tones, and disappeared behind soundproof doors as if they'd been trained to do so. Even the plants in the lobby looked afraid to grow sideways. By the 3rd day, Evelyn had her ID badge, access to shared drives, and a keycard that granted her entry into rooms she didn't yet have a reason to enter. Her desk was stationed just outside the office of the CEO, his door, always closed. Everything she received came from Marcus, a mid-level assistant who spoke quickly, smiled rarely, and referred to Jonathan Pierce as JP, like he was an acronym instead of a person. She's efficient, Marcus had reported in passing. Doesn't ask questions. That's good. But Evelyn did have questions, just not the kind you say out loud. Like, why hadn't she met him yet? Why didn't he speak for himself? And why, even with full access to his calendar and communication tools, did he seem to exist only in digital form? The work itself wasn't hard, but the atmosphere that was something else. It reminded her of museums she used to visit with her father as a child. Marble corridors, hushed voices, and priceless things locked behind glass. Places where you felt watched, but not seen, where people whispered out of habit, even when there was no one to disturb. She took notes, organized his schedule, fielded calls he never answered. She brought him coffee black, no sugar on the hour, placed it on the tray beside his office door, and found it returned, untouched, an hour later. It was as if she was assisting a myth. On Friday afternoon, Evelyn sat at her desk as the office quieted around her. Most of the staff had filtered out early Friday, being the unofficial get home before the traffic day in Burlington. But she stayed. Something about the stillness invited reflection. She opened her laptop and scrolled through the week's internal tasks. Her fingers moved quickly, until she spotted a folder that hadn't been there before. M&H. Revival Project. Confidential. Her cursor hovered. She clicked. Access denied. She frowned. Evelyn had clearance for executive-level documents. She could see payroll spreadsheets, investor correspondence, even private acquisition drafts. But not this. She checked again. Same result. Curious. She opened a new tab and searched the firm's internal database. M&H, only one result appeared. Maple and Hearth. Artisan bakery vendor file. Local. Independent. Listed under Community Investment Portfolio. Her heart gave a small, inexplicable tug. A bakery. Evelyn opened the listing. It was brief. No financials, no summary. Just an address and a note from 6 months ago. Potential site for community brand relaunch, under review by JP. She leaned back in her chair, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Maple and Hearth. She had walked past it before, hadn't she, nestled between a flower shop and an antique bookstore near the edge of downtown. She had never stepped inside, but always noticed the hand-painted sign with chipped corners. Something about it looked forgotten, like a place that still believed in slow mornings. That night, Evelyn sat by her kitchen window with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the light fade over the rooftops. The hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet. She thought of her father again. He'd always said you could learn more about a person by how they treated strangers than by how they treated friends. Jonathan Pierce remained an enigma. But maybe, just maybe, he wasn't unreachable. Maybe he was just watching the world in his own way. She glanced again at the address for Maple and Hearth. Saturday was her first free morning in weeks. She opened her phone and typed out a note. Maple and Hearth, 9:30 a.m. No alarms, no expectations, just curiosity, and maybe a little hope. The office was silent, the boss invisible, but beyond those glass walls, something was waiting to be discovered. He walked in like the room owed him something, not loud, not showy, just a presence that unsettled the corners. The bell above the door gave its usual soft chime, but somehow the air changed when he stepped inside. Evelyn noticed it right away, how the barista's hand trembled slightly as she wiped the counter, how the older gentleman in the far booth lowered his newspaper just a little. The man wore a charcoal overcoat, open over a navy sweater, and dark jeans. No hat, no gloves, though the Vermont chill had yet to fully retreat. His hair, thick and graying, was neatly combed back. He scanned the space with an expression not of curiosity, but critique, like a builder inspecting a wall that wasn't plumb. He moved past the counter without greeting, choosing a small table in the back, table 3. Evelyn later noted the one near the old brick column with the chipped white paint. He sat with his back to the window, eyes forward, arms crossed, even sitting still. He looked like a man preparing to correct something. Evelyn had arrived 15 minutes earlier, cradling her latte and savoring the quiet. Maple and Hearth was smaller than she expected, the kind of place where the wood floor creaked in just the right spots, and each mismatched chair seemed to hold its own memory. She had chosen a spot near the front window where the morning sun streamed in soft ribbons of gold across the reclaimed oak tables. It was peaceful, or had been. The barista, Sarah, according to the handwritten tag on her apron, was young, maybe 19, with curly hair pulled into a loose bun and kind eyes that darted nervously toward table 3. "Good morning," she said softly, approaching the man with a small notepad. He didn't look up. "I'll have the Americano. Triple shot. Extra hot. No foam. No lid. And a cranberry scone. If it's fresh." Sarah nodded quickly, scribbling the order. "Absolutely. I'll bring it right over." The man raised a brow. Is it fresh? Her smile faltered. I just took it out of the case. It came in this morning. He sighed, leaned back, and finally met her eyes. I asked if it was fresh, not when it came in. Evelyn stiffened in her seat. Something about his tone, it wasn't quite loud, but it sliced. Sarah blinked and gave a small, apologetic nod before retreating to the counter. He wasn't rude in the way that drew attention. He was worse. He was practiced. Evelyn tried to return to her latte, but the warmth had faded. She watched Sarah fumble slightly with the espresso machine, shoulders hunched. The cranberry scone went on a small porcelain plate with a chip at the edge. She adjusted it twice, then picked up the tray. Halfway to table 3. The tray trembled. The plate slid. The cup wobbled. Just as she reached the table, the Americano tilted and a drop of hot coffee splashed onto the edge of the man's table. It didn't touch him, but his reaction was instant. He looked at Sarah like she'd broken something expensive. "You might want to consider another line of work," he said flatly. Evelyn stood. She didn't plan to. There was no great swell of indignation, no inner voice shouting, "Say something." It was quieter than that. It was instinct, like reaching out to catch a glass before it hits the floor. She walked over, placed her half-full latte on Sarah's tray, and turned to face the man. "That seems unnecessary," she said. His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." She made a mistake. Evelyn said calmly, "1 drop of coffee. You're not scalded. Your table's intact. Maybe there's a more constructive way to express dissatisfaction." Sarah looked between them, wide-eyed. The man didn't respond. He stared at Evelyn for a long, still moment, his expression unreadable, not angry, not embarrassed, almost intrigued. Then, with a breath that sounded more like surrender than frustration, he stood up. "Keep the scone," he said quietly. He reached into his coat, pulled out a few bills, and set them gently on the counter on his way out. The bell chimed once more, and he was gone. Sarah exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since he walked in. "Thank you," she whispered. Evelyn shook her head. "You're doing fine." She returned to her seat, though the coffee was now cold and her appetite gone. But the sunlight still came through the windows, and the hum of conversation returned slowly, like a room releasing tension after a storm. 10 minutes later, as she stood to leave, she noticed something tucked beneath her saucer, a small, folded piece of paper. She opened it. "Thanks for speaking up." No name, no signature, just a clean, elegant hand and the faintest scent of cedar. Evelyn held the note in her hand all the way home. It was strange. Not just the incident, but the weight of it. The way his eyes had locked on hers, not in defense or irritation, but as if he was measuring her. She tried to shake the feeling, but something lingered, like a puzzle piece pressed into her palm she didn't yet know where to place. She slipped the note into the side pocket of her coat. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the man at table 3 was Jonathan Pierce, the CEO she'd never seen, the voice she'd never heard. Until now. Monday mornings at Westbridge Capital were usually quiet, not slow, never slow, but methodical, like the careful winding of a grandfather clock. Evelyn had come to expect a certain rhythm, inboxes filling steadily, phones buzzing in short bursts, the soft clatter of shoes on marble floors. But this Monday felt different. The email came in at 7:38 a.m. Subject, Executive Strategy Session, mandatory, from Claire Haskins. Executive HR time 9:00 a.m. Sharp location conference room. 12 attendees, JP. Finance leads, Ops, EM. EM. Her initials, her name, in the same line as his. Evelyn read it 3 times, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. She glanced toward the CEO's office door closed. As always, the same quiet corridor, the same empty coffee tray. But something inside her shifted, like standing at the edge of a lake, waiting for it to ripple. She arrived at conference room 12 5 minutes early. The table was long, the chairs leather, the glass walls looking out over the green mountains, the kind of room where billion-dollar ideas lived or died before lunch. Evelyn chose a seat 2 spots from the end, not too close, not too far. She steadied her breath, opened her notebook, clicked her pen. Once then, the door opened, and everything stilled. He walked in without announcement, without entourage, just a closed laptop in one hand and a navy folder in the other. Same salt and pepper hair, same deliberate movements, same eyes. Her heart stumbled 1 beat, maybe 2. The man from table 3, standing 10 feet away, in the flesh, in a suit. Jonathan Pierce. He didn't look at her, not yet. He greeted no one, but the room stood taller in his presence. People leaned forward, attentive. A few glanced nervously at Evelyn, as if sensing something unspoken. Jonathan set his folder down, opened his laptop, and spoke for the first time. "Thank you all for being here." His voice was exactly as she imagined. Low, even, measured like a carpenter's level. Evelyn sat very still. "I want today's session to focus on Maple and Hearth," he continued, eyes scanning the room. "The board is reviewing options for expansion, and I want this team's recommendation before week's end." He paused, then, finally, looked at her and held the moment. "Ms. Maynard," he said, as if her name tasted new. "You've been there recently, haven't you?" Evelyn blinked. Yes, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "On Saturday," he nodded once, folding his hands. "Good. Tell us what you saw." The room turned toward her. Evelyn straightened her spine. "I saw a bakery with history." She began slowly. "It's small, quiet. You can tell it used to be the center of something of community. Maybe. The floor creaks. The paint is chipped. The menu's handwritten, but there's warmth." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It isn't perfect, but it's real. It makes you feel like someone cared. Once. Maybe still does." Jonathan said nothing for a moment. "Then, would you change it?" Evelyn hesitated. The question wasn't in the agenda. The eyes in the room sharpened. "I'd preserve the essence," she said. "Modernize the operations, maybe. But keep the soul. The imperfections are what give it character." He held her gaze longer this time. A quiet intensity passed between them. Then he turned to the room. Thoughts. The discussion that followed was full of numbers and projections, cost margins, renovation options, market segmentation. Evelyn took notes, contributed when asked, but her mind kept circling back to one thing. He knew. He remembered. He had seen her speak up in that café. And now he was testing something more than strategy. The meeting ended after 73 minutes. Jonathan closed his folder, stood, and said, "Thank you all. I'll review proposals Wednesday." Dismissed. People began to shuffle papers, stand, stretch. Evelyn started to pack her things when his voice cut through the buzz. "Ms. Maynard, a moment, please." She froze. He didn't say it unkindly, just clearly. The others exited, one by one. The door closed softly behind them. She turned toward him. "Yes, Mr. Pierce." He looked at her for a long breath. You spoke with clarity today. Thank you. You also spoke with conviction. That's rarer. Evelyn's throat tightened. I've seen Maple and Hearth, he continued, more times than I can count, but hearing you describe it made me see it differently. She said nothing. Then he added, simply, I want you to lead the project. Her eyebrows lifted. Excuse me. The revival of Maple and Hearth, he said. You'll report directly to me. Full autonomy on brand direction, customer experience, and internal culture. She blinked, but I knew he finished. Yes, that's precisely why. She searched his expression, waiting for a smile, a hint of sarcasm, but there was none, only calm certainty. As she stepped out of the room a moment later, the hallway seemed brighter, not in color, in clarity. For 5 days, Evelyn had worked in silence, but today, a door had opened, and behind it was a challenge, and a man she was just beginning to understand. She didn't sleep well that night. Not because she was anxious, though maybe there was a sliver of that. Not because she was excited either. It was something in between, something quieter. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the dim light of her apartment, the conversation with Jonathan looping gently through her mind. I want you to lead the project. The words had been spoken plainly, no grand gestures, no sugarcoating, but they hadn't left her. She kept asking herself the same question. Why me by Wednesday morning? The news had spread, quietly. Of course this was Westbridge. No one gossiped, not openly. But the glances came sharper, the small nods from passing colleagues just a little more. Measured. Evelyn did what she always did, showed up early, prepared meticulously, kept her tone calm and her eyes steady. But inside, a current moved beneath the surface. She'd only been here 2 weeks. She hadn't built history with the company. She hadn't earned loyalty through years of proving herself. She was still learning people's names. And yet here she was, at the center of a revival project tied directly to the CEO. It didn't make sense, unless he'd seen something in her that day at the bakery. But that thought made her uneasy. She didn't want to be chosen for a single moment. She wanted to be chosen for something lasting. Late Thursday afternoon, she received a calendar ping meeting with JP, 40P, Mem, Office 27A. It was the first meeting he'd scheduled himself. No middlemen, no assistant forwarding requests. She took a breath before knocking on the door. His voice measured. As ever called out, "Come in." Jonathan was seated by the window, a thick binder open on his lap, a coffee steaming on the small table beside him. He looked up, motioned to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." Evelyn sat, notebook in hand. Of course. He didn't speak for a moment, just studied her. Then he said, without preamble, "You're wondering why I chose you?" She blinked. "Is it that obvious?" "Not obvious." He said, "Just human." He closed the binder and leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've spent most of my career hiring people who look good on paper. Prestigious schools, perfect resumes, excellent references." He paused. "You'd be surprised how often those people freeze when faced with something unmeasurable." Evelyn tilted her head, like a spilled cup of coffee. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "A moment tells me more than a resume ever could." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched the light shift across the floor as the late-day sun dipped lower. It felt like he wasn't trying to impress her. Just explain himself. "Courage," he added softly, "is how people behave when no one's watching. You didn't know who I was that day, but you spoke anyway." She felt the words settle deep somewhere beneath her ribs. "I didn't think. I just felt it was the right thing." "Exactly." He rose then, walked to the shelf behind his desk, and returned with a small manila envelope. He handed it to her without a word. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside was a folded slip of paper. Her handwriting. "From the bakery. Thank you for your patience and kindness. You're seen. You're appreciated." The note she'd written to Sarah. She'd left it with her tip. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "You kept it, I did." He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, not admiration, not command, something closer to quiet respect. It reminded me that some people still choose kindness, even when it's inconvenient. Evelyn tucked the note back into the envelope, her fingers suddenly unsure. For the first time in a long while, she didn't know what to say. They spoke for another half hour, about Maple and Hearth, about customer memory, about how to design a space that made people feel like they belonged. He asked her opinion often, listened carefully, pushed gently, but never patronized. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the office floor, Jonathan stood again this time, reaching for his jacket. "I'm planning site visits this weekend," he said. "A few of the original Maple and Hearth locations outside Burlington." He paused. "I'd like you to come with me." Evelyn looked up, surprised. "You want me to join?" He nodded. "No boardroom walls, no slide decks, just the real thing. Smells, sounds, faces. That's where the heart of this brand lives." She hesitated just long enough to realize she was smiling. "I'd like that," she said. He gave a short, satisfied nod. "Saturday morning, 8:00 a.m. I'll drive." As Evelyn left his office, she realized something had shifted. She still didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, she trusted the question. It wasn't just a drive. Not really. From the outside, it looked like a routine weekend site visit. Two professionals in a clean black SUV headed to survey a fading bakery location on Franklin Street. But for Evelyn, it felt like something else entirely. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was a shift. Something unspoken but present, like a melody humming beneath silence. Jonathan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. He didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The Vermont roads were quiet, dressed in golden light, trees just beginning to whisper the coming of autumn. She glanced at him once. He looked relaxed, focused. Not the same man she'd first seen behind a boardroom table or across a café floor. "So," he said finally, without looking at her, "what made you leave Boston?" His tone was casual, but there was weight behind the question. Not nosy, not corporate. Curious in a way that felt personal. Evelyn shifted in her seat, watching the landscape roll by. "I needed to breathe," she said softly. He glanced her way. She continued. "Boston was everything I thought I wanted. A great job, busy offices, meetings stacked from 8 to 6. People who answered emails at midnight and bragged about it." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "I kept thinking, if I just worked harder, I'd finally feel fulfilled." "And you didn't." She shook her head. "I felt efficient, polished, empty." He nodded slowly, keeping his eyes on the road. "Funny," he said. "I left New York for the same reason." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You left New York 20 years ago," he said. "Sold my stake in a firm before it got bought out. Everyone said I was crazy, but I was exhausted and angry, all the time. Angry at what Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, at myself, for chasing noise instead of meaning. The car was silent for a stretch after that, but it wasn't heavy. Just thoughtful. They pulled onto Franklin Street a few minutes later. The bakery was small, barely visible between two worn brick buildings, its windows dusted with time, and its signage faded. Jonathan parked, but made no move to get out right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his seat. "I used to come here after school," he said, cut through the alley behind the library. "My mother thought I was at tutoring." Evelyn smiled. "Rebel." He chuckled. "They made these honey oat rolls, still warm, 50 cents. I'd sit on the curb with a roll and a chocolate milk and swear I'd never move to the city. But you did. I did." He nodded. "And then I came back. Full circle, I guess." They got out, walked around the perimeter of the shop, peeking through the dusty glass. The interior still held traces of life-old bar stools, a pastry display case, a hanging chalkboard with ghost letters barely visible. "Do you think it can be saved?" Evelyn asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked across the street at a wide, empty lot surrounded by chain-link fencing. "Come here," he said, already walking. She followed, heels crunching softly against gravel. The lot was uneven, mostly dirt and broken pavement, but from where they stood, the view was surprisingly open sunlight pouring between old rooftops, the bakery just across, quiet and still. "I used to stand here and imagine building something," Jonathan said. "Not a chain, not a franchise, just a place with music, good coffee, slow mornings." Evelyn looked over at him. His voice had softened, less like a CEO, more like someone remembering who they used to be. "What stopped you?" He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I thought I needed to wait until everything made sense. Until the timing was perfect. The team was right. The world was ready." He turned, looking at her now. Or maybe I was just waiting for the right person to build it with. The words hung in the air, not romantic, not overt, but heavy with layers. Evelyn felt something inside her shift, not a realization, not yet, but the beginning of a question that might have an answer one day. She looked back toward the bakery, the chipped paint, the dusty windows, the possibility. Then she turned to him and asked, gently, "So, why haven't you done it yet?" He held her gaze, a half-smile forming. "Maybe," he said quietly, "I haven't found the right person to build it with." And for the first time, Evelyn didn't rush to fill the silence. She just stood beside him and let it speak for them both. Some conversations only happen over food, not the loud kind, not over clinking forks or crowded tables, but the quiet ones. When the air is still, the plates warm, and there's space between bites for something deeper to rise. It was just past 2 in the afternoon when they ducked into the small Maple and Hearth location on the edge of Milton, one of the oldest branches still standing. It had closed its doors last winter, but the keys still worked, and the sun still poured through the front windows like it remembered where to land. Evelyn dusted off 2 chairs by the front counter, while Jonathan unpacked lunch from a brown paper bag, 2 slices of quiche wrapped in parchment, and 2 lemon sodas that had begun to sweat in the late afternoon light. "Not much," he said, placing the food gently between them, "but it beats cold meetings and boxed sandwiches." Evelyn smiled. "It's perfect." They sat near the window, the silence between them not awkward, but full, like breath held before a word. The quiche was warm, buttery. Evelyn took a slow bite, letting the flavors settle. She glanced across at Jonathan, who was watching the dust swirl in the air as if it were memory. "My dad used to say," she began softly, "that it's easy to be good when everyone's watching. The real test is when no one is." Jonathan turned to her. He was a teacher. She added, middle school English. The kind of man who knew every janitor's name and brought extra gloves in winter for kids who didn't have any. Jonathan nodded slowly, listening. He passed 3 years ago, she said. But that line, it stayed with me, especially in places like this. She gestured gently at the room. Jonathan looked around the peeling paint, the wooden counter with soft dents from years of elbows, the faded chalkboard still showing the ghost of a menu from some long ago Tuesday. My mom would have liked this place, he said after a pause. She was particular about bakeries. Evelyn smiled. Oh yeah, she used to say. If a bakery doesn't make you feel like home, it's just a store with bread. He chuckled. She had a way with blunt truths. Evelyn's eyes softened. Sounds like someone I'd like. She was the first person who taught me how to read a room, he said, but also the one who reminded me that not everything needed to be fixed. Some things just needed to be felt. The two of them fell into a gentle quiet. Outside, the wind stirred leaves into lazy spirals along the sidewalk. Inside, the light touched the edge of their plates like a benediction. Jonathan reached into his pocket and glanced at his phone. Just instinct, really. But when he read the screen, his posture changed, slightly. Enough for Evelyn to notice. Bad news, she asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward her. An email. From the Westbridge Investment Board. Subject M&H modernization. Approved recommendation. The body all current store staff to be reviewed and replaced. Phase 1. Clean slate. Evelyn blinked. She looked up at him. His jaw was tight. His thumb hovered above the screen, not moving. This isn't what you want, she said quietly. No, he replied. She watched him. The way his shoulders stiffened, the crease forming between his brows. They think sentiment is a liability, he muttered. That nostalgia doesn't sell, that if the walls don't shine, no one will notice the warmth. He shook his head. I gave them the numbers, but they're chasing the wrong kind of return. Evelyn reached for her soda, but didn't sip. Her hand wrapped around the cold glass. Do you think, she asked gently, they'd listen? If they saw what we saw today, Jonathan looked at her, eyes steady. They don't want to see, he said. They want to build fast, slick, forgettable. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. Maybe, he added, almost to himself. Maybe I'm the only one left who still believes this is worth something. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't argue. She didn't try to cheer him up. She just sat with him, shared the silence, let the moment settle like flour on an old countertop, soft, patient, and real. Outside, a little boy passed by with his grandmother, pointing at the dusty display case, his voice muffled by the glass, his finger pressed to the window. Jonathan watched, and something in his face softened. Not fixed, not resolved, but returned to center. Some truths don't need an answer, just a witness. Some things are easier said with food between you, not because food makes the truth softer, but because it slows the world down long enough for the truth to be heard. The bakery on Millbrook Avenue wasn't officially open. The chairs were stacked. The closed sign still hung from the front door, and the air carried that particular scent of flour and dust. But Evelyn and Jonathan had brought their own lunch, a pair of paper-wrapped quiches from a café 2 blocks away, and 2 chilled bottles of lemon soda. They sat at a sunlit corner table, the only one they'd wiped clean, and let the quiet wrap around them like a warm scarf. Evelyn took a bite first. The crust flaked, buttery and crisp, the filling soft with just enough cheese to comfort. She hadn't realized how hungry she was, but more than that, how much she'd needed a pause. "Funny," she said, breaking the silence, "how some places make food taste different." Jonathan glanced up from his own plate. "Better or worse, real," she said, "like it remembers something I don't." He gave a soft laugh. "That's exactly what my mother used to say. She had a rule: if a bakery didn't remind you of someone you missed, it wasn't doing its job." Evelyn smiled, the warmth of that sentence staying with her longer than the flavor of the quiche. "Tell me about her," she said. Jonathan leaned back slightly, rolling the soda bottle between his palms. She was the type of woman who didn't believe in shortcuts. He began. "Hand-kneaded everything. No mixers, no pre-made dough. If you asked for a croissant at 4 p.m., she'd say, 'Come back tomorrow, dear. These things take time.'" Evelyn laughed. "I love that." She also had a way of turning bakeries into memory machines. He added, "When I was little, she'd take me to this old place on Franklin Street every Saturday. Same table, same honey oat roll. I'd sit there thinking it was just about the food. Took me years to realize it was about everything else." They fell into a comfortable silence again, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. Then Evelyn, almost without thinking, said, "My dad would have liked her." Jonathan looked over. He was a baker. She shook her head. "Teacher, middle school English." But he loved small places like this, places with chipped counters and too much sunlight. She paused. He used to say, "The true test of character is how you treat people who can't give you anything back." Jonathan studied her for a moment. "You carry that with you?" "I try to," she said softly, "even when it's hard. Especially then." He nodded slowly, and for a moment, the air between them wasn't just warm, it was known, as if something had passed from one heart to the other, without needing explanation. Then Jonathan's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again, reluctantly. He reached for it and scanned the screen. Evelyn watched the subtle shift in his shoulders. His eyes darkened, but his expression stayed composed. "What is it?" she asked. He handed the phone to her. It was an email from the Westbridge Investment Board. Subject line, M&H, Revamp Directive, Phase 1. She read it slowly. All current M&H locations to be fully rebranded. Full staff turnover. Modern interior plans approved. Community vendors to be phased out. Effective immediately. She looked up at him. "They want to erase everything." Jonathan nodded, his lips pressed thin. "They think this brand only matters if it can scale fast." He said, "If it's shiny, streamlined, replicable." "But you don't think that?" She said, "No." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, quiche forgotten. "I think people need places like this. Places with quirks and quiet corners and names written in chalk. Places where the smell of cinnamon means something." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking not defeated, but tired, like someone carrying the weight of protecting something small in a world obsessed with big. Evelyn spoke gently. "You don't have to give in. They have the votes," he said, "the funding, the plan. To them, I'm just the founder with too many feelings." She held his gaze. "That's not a weakness," she said. "That's the only reason this place ever meant anything." They sat in silence again. The light had shifted, lower now, casting golden shadows on the tiled floor. Dust danced in the air, and from the window, they could hear a boy laughing as he rode past on a squeaky bicycle. Jonathan watched the boy disappear down the sidewalk. Then, almost to himself, he said, "Maybe I'm the only one left who still believes this is worth saving." Evelyn didn't try to correct him, didn't offer a solution. She simply reached forward, tore off a corner of her quiche, and handed it to him like a quiet offering. He accepted it. They shared the last bites in silence. And in that stillness, amid old chairs and new fears, something unspoken wrapped around them both. Not an answer, but an anchoring. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need someone to hold them in the quiet. If no one else would speak, then she would be the one to rise again. The boardroom on the 14th floor had seen countless decisions, mergers, acquisitions, rebrands with shiny slogans and forgettable fonts. But today, it was Maple and Hearth on the line. Evelyn sat near the far end of the table, not quite at the edge, not quite at the center. She hadn't been listed on the agenda. She wasn't a board member. Not yet. Just a guest, an observer, a name attached to a hopeful project. At the head of the table, Jonathan sat tall, unreadable. The others around him were dressed in the soft armor of high positions, dark suits, slick hair, voices trained to stay calm, even when saying things that sliced. Gen Z is driven by aesthetic alignment, said one advisor. They want bold, digital-first interiors. Think neon signage, QR code menus, curated playlists. Vintage is fine as long as it's ironic. Laughter. Evelyn kept her hands folded in her lap, her jaw stilled, but her heart was rising, steadily. They talked about metrics, heat maps, bounce rates, and something called ambient brand resonance. No one mentioned cinnamon, or warm tile floors, or the way an old door chime can sound like a memory. And staff. Someone added, we should standardize training, young, energetic, matching aprons, tablet ordering. Evelyn could feel it now, not heat, but purpose. That same quiet fire she'd felt in the bakery. The same one that had pushed her to speak up when Sarah had been cornered at table 3. But she wasn't on the list today. Her name hadn't been printed. She was supposed to observe. Stay polite. She looked at Jonathan. He hadn't said much, but his eyes, they weren't neutral. They were watching, waiting. And then someone said it. Let's not romanticize the past. People don't buy nostalgia. They buy experience. That was when Evelyn stood. No one expected it. The voices stopped. Chairs shifted. A paper rustled somewhere near the back. She didn't raise her voice. But somehow, the room quieted under it. I'm sorry, she began, but I think you're wrong. A few eyebrows lifted. Jonathan remained still. She took a breath. You think young people want flash, but what they actually want is feeling. Not everything old is nostalgia. Some of it is memory. Some of it is the way their grandmother's kitchen smelled. The crack in the café tile they used to jump over as kids. The paper menu with the corner folded where their mom always wrote her name. Silence. Trend, she said softly, moves fast, but memory stays. And this brand Maple and Hearth was never built on being trendy. It was built on being known, on being familiar in a world that changes too much, too fast. She let the words land, then added simply, if we erase that, we lose what makes it worth saving. No one spoke for a moment. Then Jonathan leaned forward and pressed the small button near his seat. The projector stopped. The slide deck vanished into silence. He didn't look at the board first. He looked at Evelyn. There was something in his eyes, something quiet but sure. Not surprise, not approval, recognition. He turned to the group. This project, he said slowly, was never about catching up to culture. It's about reconnecting with it. And what Evelyn just said, that's the heartbeat of it. A few members shifted in their seats. I've decided, he continued, we're keeping the character of Maple and Hearth intact. Any modernization will serve the story, not erase it. He paused. And effective immediately, Evelyn Maynard is promoted to Director of Customer Experience for this project. Final voice on all in-store design and staff culture. Gasps weren't audible, but the surprise was. Someone opened their mouth to object. Jonathan raised a hand, firm, calm. Final. This isn't up for debate, he said. Meeting adjourned. The room emptied slowly. Some offered short nods. A few avoided eye contact. Evelyn stayed seated, her pulse still loud in her ears. She hadn't expected to speak. She definitely hadn't expected to be heard. Jonathan walked over, standing beside her chair. He didn't rush. He waited until the door clicked shut behind the last advisor. Then, in a voice quiet enough for only her, he said, "I didn't know I needed someone like you until you stood up." Evelyn looked up, surprised. Jonathan's expression was warm, unmasked. "I don't mean just today," he added. "I mean since the first moment you stepped into that bakery. Since you didn't stay silent." She felt her throat tighten, not with pride, with something older, deeper, responsibility, and maybe something like beginning. Change doesn't always start with noise. Sometimes it begins with a woman who refuses to sit still. Every morning, at exactly 9:03 a.m., a cup of coffee appeared on Evelyn's desk. Not at 9:00, not 9:05, 9:03, always the same. One small ceramic cup, just enough cream to soften the bitterness. A dash of cinnamon not stirred, just floating, waiting, and no note. At first, she thought it was a mistake. The office barista must have dropped it off on the wrong desk. But then it happened again, and again, day after day, the same time, the same quiet offering. She never saw who placed it. The cup was simply there, as if the morning had grown it from the desk itself. At first, Evelyn didn't ask. There was something sacred about it. The not knowing, the space between. It became a rhythm, a moment of pause before the day began when the office was just waking up, emails barely blinking, and the windows still fogged with breath. And somehow, it made her feel seen. Not the version of her that led project calls or corrected pitch decks, but the quiet Evelyn, the one who sat by bakery windows and believed in paper menus and second chances. A week passed, then two. Still, no one said a word, until one Thursday morning. She left her pen on the edge of her keyboard, just slightly tilted across where the coffee would usually sit. A test. At 9:03 the cup was there, but the pen was neatly moved an inch to the left. Someone had seen. Someone had noticed. The answer came the next day. By accident. She had left her phone at reception on her way up and turned back for it. As she rounded the corner, she slowed just enough to stay unseen. There, standing by the front desk, was Jonathan. He wasn't giving orders. He wasn't checking his phone. He was holding a small tray with two cups, one plain black, the other just like hers. He said something softly to the receptionist, then turned and walked away quickly. Quietly. The receptionist smiled to herself as she carried the tray toward the elevator. Evelyn stepped back into the hall, unseen, her heart beating in a rhythm far less predictable than 9:03. The coffee wasn't just habit, it was intentional, and suddenly, everything felt warmer. That afternoon, they were alone in the elevator, just the two of them. The air was quiet, polite, but charged. Evelyn didn't look directly at him when she spoke. "Cream, cinnamon, no sugar," she said casually. He didn't reply immediately, but she could feel the corner of his smile, even without turning. "Too much sugar hides the truth," he said. She glanced over. "That why you never add any?" He looked at her, eyes soft. "No," he said gently. "It's because you already have enough." Later that day, As they stood reviewing vendor lists by the large conference window, she turned to him. "You could have just let me wonder," she said, "about the coffee." He met her gaze. "I liked watching you receive it," he said, "before the rush, before the world asked things of you." She swallowed. Why, his answer was quiet, steady. "Not because you needed it, but because I wanted to." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't performance. It was simple and deeply real. And Evelyn felt it deep in the part of her that had long since stopped expecting quiet kindness from powerful men. That evening, long after most had left, she found herself walking past the old maple and hearth test kitchen. The scent of vanilla still lingered in the air. She thought about cinnamon, about 903, about the way beginnings rarely feel like fireworks. Most of the time, they feel like warmth in your hands. Like steam rising from porcelain, like someone saying, "Without words, I see you." The next morning, at exactly 9:03, the coffee was there again, but this time, a folded slip of paper lay beneath it. It wasn't signed, just a line written in neat, familiar script. Some mornings are best when shared. Saturday, Evelyn didn't answer aloud, but when she returned from lunch, the empty cup was cleaned and placed upside down on the tray. A silent yes. Later that afternoon, a company-wide email appeared in her inbox. Subject: Maple and Hearth Grand Reopening. Next Saturday location, Franklin Street. Flagship time, 11:00 a.m. Everyone welcome. Note: special guest announcement. Pending. Evelyn smiled. She had no idea that the special guest was her. Some love stories don't start with declarations. They begin with quiet rituals, and someone who remembers the way you take your coffee. 1 year later, same street, same golden sunlight spilling onto the sidewalk. But everything was different except how it felt. The sign above the door read, Maple and Hearth. Same name, same serif letters carved into soft wood, but now the paint gleamed gently in the light, fresh but not flashy. The brass bell above the door had been polished, but it still let out the same soft chime as it always had, like an old friend saying, "You're home." Evelyn stood near the entrance, heart beating slow and full. She took it all in. The tile floors had been cleaned and regrouted, not replaced. The counter had a new top, but still carried the faint marks of elbows leaned too long, and along the back wall, above the pastry shelf, hung a new wooden sign she had chosen herself. Come for the coffee. Stay for the memory. Guests poured in. Former employees, curious neighbors, even a few local reporters. Some came for nostalgia. Some came for free samples. But Evelyn watched as they entered and slowed faces shifting, shoulders relaxing. The space worked. It welcomed without demanding. It remembered without clinging. It was exactly what she'd dreamed, and she almost couldn't believe she'd had a hand in it. Near 11:15, someone gently tapped her elbow. It was Claire from HR, smiling. "You're up?" Evelyn blinked. "Wait me." Claire nodded. "Jonathan asked for you to open. He said this was always your story to tell." She stepped onto the small platform near the front counter, a low microphone, a string of Edison lights above, the scent of baked apples and cinnamon in the air. People turned, smiled, waited. She took a breath. "I remember the first time I walked into this place," she began. "It was closed, dusty. The shelves were empty, but something about it still felt warm, like it had a memory of people inside it." A pause. "I didn't come here looking for a new job. I came for a coffee. But somehow, I left with a reason to stay." Soft chuckles, gentle nods. "This place," she continued, "isn't just a bakery. It's where grandparents bring grandkids on quiet Saturdays, where first dates spill powdered sugar on napkins, where someone going through a hard week finds the only moment of peace in a warm blueberry scone. Her voice wavered slightly, but she let it. And none of that, she said, was in the data. Laughter. Now, the knowing kind. So today, Evelyn smiled, we opened the doors again. Not to something new, but to something true. Applause. Not loud, but full. She stepped back. The microphone hummed briefly. Then another figure stepped forward. Jonathan. He didn't bring notes, didn't glance at the crowd. He just looked at her for a moment, then turned to the room. I want to tell you a story, he said. It starts at a table. Table 3. To be exact. A quiet Tuesday morning, a customer growing frustrated, a young waitress on the verge of tears. Evelyn froze. She knew this story, but she'd never heard him say it out loud. In that moment, he continued. Someone spoke up, not loudly, not to impress anyone. She thought no one of importance was watching. His gaze drifted slowly back to Evelyn, but someone was. There was a stillness in the room now. Jonathan went on, his voice quieter, but clear. That woman didn't just defend someone. She reminded me after years of meetings and metrics why this place mattered. Not the bakery, the feeling. He paused, looked out over the crowd. I watched her lead, without a title. I watched her rebuild something from memory. I watched her treat every detail as if it mattered, because she believed people matter. He turned back to her fully now, and somewhere in the middle of all that, I fell in love with her. Gasps. Soft ones. A few hands over hearts. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Not yet. Jonathan stepped down from the platform. The crowd moved to let him through. The room, once filled with voices, was now holding its breath. He stopped in front of her. No speeches now. Just him and her. He reached into his pocket, a small velvet box. Simple, steady, timeless. He opened it. Inside, a ring. Nothing flashy. Just a single round diamond, set on a thin gold band like something passed down between generations. He held it gently and said, Evelyn Maynard, I don't want to build this without you. Not the business, not the life. Will you marry me? And in that moment, all the noise of the past year, the early mornings, the quiet coffees, the hard meetings, the quiet rebellions folded into something still and bright. A beginning, disguised as a full circle. Evelyn didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. She just reached out, touched his hand, and whispered, yes. Some love stories begin with grand gestures, but the truest ones begin quietly, with coffee, with courage, and with one small act of kindness at table 3. Their first meeting was a thank you. Their last, a quiet promise beneath warm light and held breath. The ring rested in Evelyn's hand, not yet on her finger. Jonathan had stopped speaking. The room had fallen into hush. But in her chest, something familiar stirred, not nerves, not surprise, recognition of him, of this, of everything they had built, long before this moment arrived. Her answer wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She smiled, then nodded, and whispered, yes. There was no applause, just the chime of the bakery bell in the distance, the hum of life returning to the world as if it had been holding its breath too. Jonathan reached for her hand, and with a tenderness that said more than words could, slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. But what caught her breath wasn't the diamond, it was the engraving inside. 3 words, measured by heart. Later that afternoon, the reopening flowed like soft music. Guests wandered, laughed, took photos by the vintage pastry display Evelyn had fought to preserve. Sarah, the once nervous waitress from Table 3, now stood behind the counter, confident and proud, leading a small team with the same grace she'd once been shown. Mr. Henley, the retired postman who lived nearby, stopped to tell Evelyn, "Feels like my wife's kitchen in here," in a good way. Even the board members came, some skeptical, but most quietly impressed, not by numbers, but by the feeling. And that was the point, wasn't it? Evelyn stood for a while by the chalkboard wall, now covered in handwritten notes from customers. "Thank you for keeping the soul." My daughter smiled the whole time. "Tastes like 1984. First date here. Second one's already planned." She felt Jonathan's presence before he spoke. "You made this happen," he said quietly beside her. She turned to him, hand still tracing one of the chalk notes. "We did." He shook his head, gently. "I hired you because you were brave," he said, "but I stayed because your heart reminded me how to lead again." She didn't speak. There was no need. Some truths deserve their own silence. Outside, the wind rustled. The autumn sun dipped lower. A child pointed at the window display shaped like a giant cinnamon roll, and his mother laughed softly behind him. Inside, the air smelled of clove, warm pastry, and fresh beginnings. The project that had once nearly been erased by rebranding initiatives was now fully alive with Evelyn as its heart. She had restructured training to focus on warmth, not speed. Rewrote the menu to include hand-drawn illustrations from local kids. Insisted every store include one mismatched chair to remind us we're not supposed to all look the same. And slowly, Jonathan had stepped back from the daily operations, not because he didn't care, but because he trusted. And that trust had grown roots. In her, in what they'd built. And in something even more delicate, what they were building together. That night, after the last guest had gone and the doors were locked, Evelyn turned off the lights one by one. Jonathan waited by the front, holding 2 paper cups of tea. No cinnamon this time, just chamomile and honey. Quiet comfort. They sat in the corner booth, Table 3, the place it had all begun. "I never thought this would be my life," she said softly. Jonathan smiled. "Neither did I." She looked down at the ring again, traced the inside of the band, measured by heart. "You really believe that?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, gaze steady. "I used to measure everything by output," he said, "by charts, reports, quarterly gains, but that didn't build anything that lasted." He looked around the bakery, now still and full of echoes. This lasts, because it was built with care, with intention, with memory, and yes, with heart. She nodded, slowly, and for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn felt whole. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. A couple walked past, holding hands. The bell above the door jingled softly in the wind, though no one opened it. Inside, 2 people sat with warm tea and a world they'd helped rebuild, not with power, not with speed, but with the quiet, steady work of kindness. The last thing Evelyn saw before leaving that night was the new plaque on the wall beside the door. It hadn't been there that morning. It was small, simple. This place was built by courage and kept alive by heart. She didn't know who had written it. Maybe Jonathan, maybe Sarah, maybe someone she'd never meet. But it didn't matter, because it was true, and in a world that often forgets what truly matters. Evelyn Maynard remembered. So did Jonathan Pierce. And, because of them, a little bakery on Franklin Street did too. Measured not by trend, not by speed, not by scale, but quietly, patiently, measured by heart. Sometimes, the smallest act of courage can change everything. Evelyn didn't speak up to be noticed. She didn't defend that waitress to win approval. She did it because her father once told her, "Do the right thing, even when no one's watching." And that moment, simple, quiet, and brave, opened the door to something much bigger, not just a job or a title, but a life built on authenticity, connection, and love. This story reminds us that character isn't shaped in boardrooms or during big speeches. It's revealed in the quiet choices we make, in how we treat others when there's nothing to gain. As we grow older, we learn that life isn't about chasing the loudest victories, but about honoring the gentle truths that live inside us. So today, hold the door for someone, speak kindly, choose integrity over ease. You never know who's listening or how deeply your quiet kindness might echo. Because sometimes, the most meaningful lives are measured not by achievement, but by heart. Thank you for spending your precious time with us today. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us continue bringing you meaningful tales that heal, inspire, and connect us all. And if you have a quiet act of courage or kindness in your own life, we'd love to hear it in the comments below. Until next time, take care and keep listening with your heart.